Drones, robots, and artificial intelligence are changing the face of warfare. What was once the stuff of science fiction is now transforming the battlefield and playing out in places such as Ukraine and Gaza. But with technological advances come additional dangers to both civilians and soldiers. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Technology is revolutionizing military operations with AI-powered drones and robots. The ongoing war in Ukraine has accelerated the development of small drones, which are cheap and mass-produced. So, how is this technology impacting the battlefield? What are the deadly consequences of these advancements?
On Ukraine's front lines, machines are taking over tasks once done by soldiers. This robot, called Lyot or Fury, moves across rubble while troops advance. It carries a machine gun and sends live video back to operators. Other ground robots are also being used. They can cross dangerous terrain without putting soldiers at risk.
At the moment, the equipment, the unmanned ground systems are split, so we send 30 robots to the Ukrainian armed forces to support them in their current conflict. At the same time, we have over 15 deployed in European armed forces.
Pilots guide them with headsets. It looks like a video game, but the consequences are deadly. Larger drones scan the battlefield. They track enemy positions and send information to commanders. Almost every Ukrainian brigade now has its own drone unit. Russia is using drones too. Iranian-made Shaheds fly hundreds of kilometers to strike fuel depots and power plants. For soldiers on the ground, the buzz of propellers is one of the most frightening sounds. It often means explosives are seconds away.
Вони також забезпечують.
Drones save lives because people don't have to take on these tasks anymore. For example, logistics or mining are already done by robots that we can sacrifice. If one explodes, we'll send a new one.
In the war on Gaza, Israel has retrofitted commercial DJI drones to bomb and surveil territory. With drones and robots rapidly multiplying on battlefields, will the future of war be fought more by machines than by humans?
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining me in the studio, we have Shawn Bell. Shawn is a military analyst and a retired British Air Vice Marshal. We also have Paul Ingram. Paul is a research affiliate that's at the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. And in Dublin, we have Lara Marlowe. She's a journalist and the author of How Good It Is, I Have No Fear of Dying. And that's a book about life on the front line in the Ukraine war. And in London, David Hambling, the journalist and author. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. David, to you first. What we're seeing on the battlefields now is almost like science fiction becoming military fact.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much that's happening at the moment that nobody would have believed just a few years ago. I mean, some of it is absolutely dystopian, post-apocalyptic Mad Max stuff.
I can see the cover of your 2015 book behind you, Swarm Troopers. A decade on, can you believe the changing face of warfare since you wrote that book?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much as I expected at the time, because what we're now seeing is the absolute dominance of very large numbers of small, cheap drones, rather than the sort of large, expensive systems that have dominated the battlefield before now.
Lara, to you, tell us about your experiences on the front line in Ukraine, what you saw, people operating them, the drone operators, how they live, and the damage, I guess, they're doing to Russia.
Well, I wrote this book with Lieutenant Yulia Mikitenko, who's the commander of a drone platoon between Liman and Slovyansk in Donetsk. And they started welding explosives onto FPV drones early on after the full-scale invasion But they use drones for all sorts of things. They have the Leleika, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV. And that's an agricultural drone originally. They use those for reconnaissance. They're also using drones increasingly to ferry supplies to the men in the dugouts, because they take most of their casualties moving back and forth between the line of contact and their rear bases. So they drop water, food, medicine, all kinds of supplies into the dugouts from the drones. There was an incident in February, March of this year where a house collapsed on a drone unit, and they had a very small hole, but not big enough for the men to get out. And they were under constant Russian fire, and they kept those men alive for a month just by dropping supplies through the hole with the drones. I see drone feed footage of dozens of motorcycle carcasses spread over fields, and they're just picking them off with these drones. There are all kinds of drones: Mavics, FPVs, Leleikas. The Ukrainians are also using increasingly land drones, which are robots that go and rescue wounded men or retrieve bodies. And they pioneered the use of sea drones in this war. The Magura sea drone has destroyed many ships in the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And so the Ukrainians are really leaders, although at the moment the Russians are ahead of them. The newest thing is the fiber optic drones, which do not emit a radio signal, and they have dozens of kilometers long, tiny threads, fiber optic threads, which they use to transmit the images back. No doubt some way will be found to destroy the fiber optic drones as well. But that's the thing at the moment. And I suppose we ought to mention the June 1st Operation Spiderweb, when Ukraine did an extraordinary operation. They smuggled into Russia dozens and dozens of drones in containers which had removable roofs. And the roofs came off, the drones flew out and attacked Russian fighter bombers on the tarmac in air bases across Russia. And they destroyed about a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet in one day in this Operation Spiderweb. It was really astonishing.
Thanks, Lara. Sean, to you, warfare has changed forever since your day. I mean, the technology is just moving on at pace.
Yes, it has, but I would say that in warfare there's always been revolutions. I mean, when the bow and arrow was invented, it was sort of considered cheating in a way, because war up to then had been gladiators meeting on the battlefield and fighting each other, then the musket. So there's always been a new piece of equipment. The other thing that I think we've got to be quite careful, particularly what lessons we learn from the Ukraine campaign, is that this is a David versus Goliath battle. If they were to meet on the battlefields, the bigger side would win. And unfortunately, Russia, with 150 million plus people compared to 38 million, I think it is in Ukraine, the bigger side would win. So Ukraine has to find ways, asymmetric ways, to fight Russia. And that's been where they've been very successful exploiting drones to that end.
But just to pick up on a point there that was made, Russia are actually ahead at the moment in terms of the drone technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got to be quite careful here. You remember when Russia said it had hypersonic missiles and that they were completely not able to be destroyed. I'm well aware that the West has a number of skunk works available. It's not always helpful to show your enemy what you've got. Russia's been playing this out. Fiber optic drones are the next generation, absolutely right. That is a big worry. But of course, both sides are now leaving a spider's web of that sort of lattice on the battlefields. And as soon as the MOD is already generating EMP cannons, I think Thales have been inventing ways to use EMP to take out some of these. I think it'll be a constant innovation, counter-innovation. That's what we're going to see on the battlefields. But it is undoubtedly causing a major amount. Well, it's the most casualties. World War I, World War II, it was artillery that caused most of the damage on the battlefields. Today, over 80% is drones.
Paul, to you, all these countries racing ahead with this technology, where are we in terms of international law keeping up with the technology?
Well, I think one of the keys here is, whilst, yes, there has always been revolutions in technology, the acceleration is extraordinary. And I think that does mean that what we have and what we see on the battlefield is very different to what it was 10 years ago. And the problem with international regulations is that there's all sorts of problems, but one of them is that it's way behind the development of the technologies. It's one reason why David's one of my heroes, because he's able to bring into the public arena the extraordinary dimensions of these technologies and the implications that they have for international regulation. The big problem with international regulation ultimately is that those that have the most power have the most military power and the least incentive to regulate themselves for other states to catch up with. So there is this arms race of capabilities, and so you have the Russians, you have the Americans and the British and others getting in the way of conversations around how we outlaw autonomous weapon systems, for example, because they don't want to be regulated, because they don't trust the others to abide by the regulations should they be agreed. So we have these conversations going on for the last 10 years on autonomous weapon systems, and we still haven't got anywhere with those conversations.
Thanks, Paul. Back to you, David. Which countries are leading the way then in terms of drone production and where this technology is going? What's your assessment there?
In many ways, Ukraine is way in the lead, and the Russians slightly behind them. In terms of just sheer numbers of military drones produced, Ukraine started from roughly nothing, a few thousand, produced about 200,000 drones in 2024, about 1.5 million last year, aiming for 4 million this year, and then 10 million beyond that. So they're really ramping up production on just a gigantic scale. And by contrast, the US latest order for small attack drones, they are buying, I think, 340 for the year, which is like 1 hour's production in Ukraine. Russia, they produced getting on for 1 million last year. That is going up. But it's interesting that the Russians also see that small drones are a vital tactical tool for them, and that they can't survive just using the artillery, air power, and tanks that they've had in the past. They are desperately trying to catch up in small drones.
Thanks.
There are a lot of other players, and the one that I do just have to mention is China, because they are the world's biggest drone producer. They don't produce a lot of military drones at the moment. If they did, they could swamp the world.
Just Lara, to you on that point, do you think drones are keeping Ukraine in the fight? David mentioned the word survival. Do you think this kind of technology has kept Ukraine going as long as it has?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the General Zaluzhny, who's now Ukraine's ambassador to London, told The Economist in November of 2023 that the front line in eastern Ukraine was stalemated, and that was because of drone technology. That is to say that despite having far fewer men and far less materiel, the Ukrainians have basically been able, if not to stop, at least to dramatically slow Russian progress in eastern Ukraine by drones, because they see everything that moves. Both sides see everything that moves, and the effect of that is to paralyze the conflict. Going back to Ukrainian superiority in drone technology, President Zelensky said quite recently that Ukraine will sell between 10 and $30 billion worth of drones to the US. So they're actually superior to the US in drone technology, which is pretty amazing. And the other thing that is very pertinent to the conflict in Ukraine is the Shahed drones. The Shahed is kind of where Russia's alliance with Iran and China come and its enmity for Ukraine all come together. Iran started sending Shahed drones to Russia in 2022. Russia now manufactures them themselves in two places, in Tatarstan and another city. And they are terrorizing Ukrainian cities. You talked about the need for international law or regulation. These drones are fired up to almost 500 one night. I think it was July 8th was the night the most were fired. And they travel very slowly. They travel something like under 200 kilometers an hour. They can be shot down fairly easily, although the Russians are constantly adapting them to make them fly higher, for example, make them immune to countermeasures. and they carry a big warhead. They explode into apartment buildings, occasionally against military targets, but basically against civilians. And they have incendiary devices. Some of them have thermobaric warheads, and they create a huge amount of damage, kill a lot of people. And these weapons, they're called the poor man's cruise missile. They cost between $30,000 and $80,000 to make. They have plastic coating. They have cardboard in them. They're actually quite cheap weapons. They use components from all over the world. They use US components, Swiss, Japanese components, but they do a tremendous amount of damage. And Ukraine doesn't have the equivalent of the Shahed. And this is one of the most formidable cheap weapons in the Russian arsenal.
Thanks, Lara. Sean, to you, talk to me from a soldier's perspective. If you're dug in on the front line, this must be absolutely terrifying when you hear this noise, this drone coming towards you. How can they defend themselves against these things?
Well, I've been a few visits now out to Ukraine. Nowhere near the front line, deliberately, I'm told, for that sort of thing. I did that when I was in my younger military time. And the stories coming back from people who have served out there, it's changed the whole face of, and it's the fear. But exactly as Lara said, it's definitely stalled. I think I would counter slightly. I think the Shahed, I was stood next to a Shahed, went to visit one of the bases out there. And the Ukrainians have been very clever at embracing technology. We have been reluctant to sell them drones because we take so long to build them, and it's all the flight testing, the safety, the assurance. They don't need any of that. So actually, by sending kits out, they assemble them and send them on their way. They've been very effective at doing long-range strikes against some of the oil infrastructure, closing down Moscow's airport, stuff like that. And I think the key for me on the battlefield is this is all about territory for Russia. It was about achieving its aim, which we believe is the 4 regions, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson and Crimea. Once they've done that, they might stop. But they've been singularly unable to make the sort of progress that they need to. The one point I would also pick up on is that China might be able to dominate the market. There was some interesting intelligence the other day that there were some drones that had been acquired through China that were then sent towards Russia. They all stopped short. And the worry about when you start sourcing some of this stuff, it's not just about the hardware, it's also about the software. And it's really difficult sometimes to find out where that nugget of software is that's going to stop you using that weapon the way you intend to use it. That's something we've got to be very careful on in the West.
Paul, just come in on that and see you nodding away.
Well, I think we need to see the drones in the broader network of capabilities, because drones don't operate in isolation. So I really take seriously this idea that the software is really important, and the sensing capabilities and the networking capabilities. And I think that this is why it's very difficult to say that this country is ahead rather than this country, because it's actually how it's used, it's the way these capabilities all come together to deliver military effectiveness. And we also have to see not only the revolution in the technology, but also who has control over it. Because I think one of the reasons why the Ukrainians have managed to deploy these technologies so effectively is because a number of very significant, powerful tech companies from the US and other countries have piled into Ukraine and seen this as a really effective lab for them to develop their capabilities. So as well as the interstate issues we've got here, we've got private consortia who are very keen on making a large amount of money and developing tech capability that then translates into who knows what in the future, because you've got the dangers of proliferation, you've got the dangers of profit being the driving force here rather than other state interests. And it's very difficult in the long run to see if they are willing to go into Ukraine and do this, then where's the next place that they're going to be going into for the interests of their bottom line?
Sean, back to you.
So, Paul, just a really quick point that Paul brought up. I mean, it's one of those things that when you develop this new sort of capability, how is it going to be best exploited on the battlefields? And one of the things that the point that Lara made about the Americans not buying that many, there is a general view in defense that the platform itself will last about 2 years and it'll be out of date because there'll be new technology. What you put on it will be changing almost day to day. And therefore, why would you buy millions of drones today that in 2 years' time will be completely redundant? The technology is all about what you bolt on. And I think that's where a lot of the Western companies are making a lot of their effort.
Thanks, Sean. David, just talk to me about these fiber optic drones that Lara mentioned earlier on. Are they a game changer, do you think, in the Ukrainian war?
Yes, I mean, this is a bizarre piece of technology. It didn't look at all practical to me, but it works. So what you've got is, rather than having a radio connection to your drone has a spool of fiber optic fiber, very small diameter, and you can get a 20-kilometer reel that weighs about a kilo or so, and it trails that behind it as it goes, and that is used to communicate with the drone. The main effect of that is that the drone is then completely immune to all electronic warfare countermeasures, which are what stop the majority of drones at the moment. So particularly with well-defended targets, this means they can now be destroyed with impunity. The other advantages that fiber optic gives you is that it can operate very close to the ground because you're not worried about losing the radio signal, and it can operate inside buildings and in tunnels. So we've seen a lot of videos of Ukrainian fiber optics actually going inside garages and down tunnels and looking for Russian vehicles and Russian soldiers. So these things can go everywhere.
Thank you, David. Lara, I just want to talk about the war in Gaza and what we've seen from Israel. Have you concerns over this kind of tech being used against civilian populations? Because we've seen horrific videos on social media of drones being used to target civilians queuing for food, civilians going about their daily business.
I'm very concerned about the massacre of innocent civilians in Gaza, and two, very concerned about the use of all these weapons, whether it be drones or missiles or just traditional conventional weapons against civilians, because it's illegal, it's against the law. It's crazy that we even have to say this over and over and over, but yes, I mean the Israelis have used drones very often to assassinate people as well, because you can identify people with a drone. You can see quite well. It's amazing the clarity with which you see them.
Sean, I'm struck by the phrase "necessity is the mother of invention." That's pretty much what's gone on in Ukraine, isn't it?
Yes, in a way, I say, if you go right the way back to February 22, the start of all this, I think the West largely expected Ukraine to fall pretty swiftly. You remember those 40-mile convoys outside Kyiv. And actually, it's just through the bravery, resilience of the Ukrainian people and the fact that they were the underdogs. Smaller, they were operating older Soviet kit. They had the limited supplies of it. What they did have was courage, tenacity, determination. And then with the support of the West, which only slowly ramped up, they've managed to hold out. People remains a big issue for them. I think what's interesting about the drones, though, is that we've been focused on warfare. But of course, there are some positives. Drones have been used for delivery now. They're pipeline inspections. The downside, of course, they're delivering contraband into prisons and stuff like that. So they're here to stay. And the question is, how do we manage that? The one thing I would be cautioned, though, we talked a little bit about Gaza. The part of the operation we defined by drones between Russia and Ukraine. But when you look at Israel and Iran, there's no land border there. Israel managed to roll back Iranian air defenses in 24 hours using some drones, but then it was conventional air and space power that actually laid waste Iran's defenses. There were fighter jets operating with impunity over Iran. So let's not mark the end of conventional warfare. It's undoubtedly been a massive key decisive moment for Ukraine, but it was because they're the underdogs and they've done a spectacular job of holding back the Russians.
Paul, this tech is changing warfare forever.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and as Sean was already saying, warfare has always changed forever. But it's the accelerating nature of this, and it is also some of the qualitative shifts that then happen. So, for example, we are seeing in Gaza today the use of artificial intelligence to target and then take out Hamas or somebody that might be Hamas. And Israel itself acknowledges that its software is not perfect. So you have an almost completely automated system of killer robots operating in the Gaza situation and taking out civilians. And that is really concerning. It has all sorts of knock-on consequences around the future of warfare and the protection of civilians, because it is a war crime to target civilians. Of course, civilians have always died in warfare, but we are seeing significant deaths, numbers of deaths, and we are seeing almost a lack of care about the fact that civilians are murdered in these ways, and the justifications are, well, there could have been fighters in that arena. And I think artificial intelligence has played a much more significant role in the Gaza war than it has in the past, and is a laboratory not just for the technology, but for the challenge that the international community has in regulating these technologies.
Thank you for your expertise, Lara, as well in Dublin, and Sean and Paul here in the studio with me. Fascinating. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.